Welcome back to the Burr Investor Podcast, where our mission is to empower aspiring real estate investors in their journey towards building generational wealth. Our guest today is my good friend Richard Evans from Evans Collection Law Firm. By trade, he's a collection law litigator who goes after high net worth individuals and companies who are attempting to shield their assets from creditors who are after them. His job is to pierce their corporate veils. Guys, this is going to be an exciting conversation here. Richard, thank you so much for taking the time to come on. I appreciate you. I know, you're very, very busy, but you're very generous to come on today.
Yeah, man, no problem. These are questions that a lot of real estate investors, I'm sure, have. And to be honest with you, having attended many events, some of which, you've attended, where I also met you, there's a lot of misconceptions about how much protection, someone gets legally from LLCs and corporations and land trusts and all this other kind of stuff that people throw out there advertising that's going to make you bulletproof. So there's a lot of details in that, so hopefully I can inform some people.
This is going to be exciting, man. There's a lot to unpack here. And, I want to, listeners, listen very, very carefully here. If you're an investor or aspiring investor, or if you have an LLC or a corporate structure, you need to pay very close attention here. Richard's about to share some very valuable information. So let's get this started. Before we go into this, I want to mention that Richard is also a real estate investor. He invests in short-term and mid-term rentals here in the Los Angeles and California area. And he's also a Burr investor. He invests in buy and hold properties using the Burr strategy out of state. So before we jump into the questions and the main topic that we have for today, Richard, can you touch on a little bit about your real estate investing strategies and touch on that a little bit if you don't mind?
Yeah, it's very boring. It's a buy and hold type of thing. And then during the pandemic, I did the mandatory Airbnbs. I had one out by Joshua Tree and then one in the mountains. I made lots of mistakes. Which I try now is I'm also a real estate agent and I represent clients, kind of like Alex. And I try to, endeavor to have clients avoid the types of mistakes that I made. That's really all I'm trying to do. So yeah, I've done the Airbnbs, and then I got a guy in Indianapolis who, is a good friend of mine. And we have done some of the Burr strategy out there. So I have my hands in different stuff, but mainly it's just been buying and holding here in Los Angeles type of area, and that is what has really given me the baseline and the foundation for everything else. Because you build equity here, so we can just get a HELOC and start buying houses in other markets, off our equity that we have here. So that's another thing that I hope to kind of stress to my real estate clients.
Awesome, man. Thank you so much for sharing it. And yeah, I get it. It's boring and it's got to be boring for it to make sense and, to build that appreciation. So thanks for touching on that. So today's main topic is going to be how do I arrange my assets and holdings and how do I conduct myself to minimize liability and legal exposure? So first question, Richard, what is the role of insurance in protecting me and what are its limitations and pitfalls?
So insurance is great, and insurance is always the first line of defense in any type of asset situation. Now, and this is if obviously someone slips and falls, breaks their neck on the property or something like that. Obviously, insurance is your first go-to, but insurance is a little bit complicated in that insurance companies make money by not paying claims. They have huge buildings on Wilshire Boulevard, and they don't do that because they pay. They do that because they don't pay. So you got to be careful in the type of insurance you have for the type of property. For example, if you are a house hacker, which I advocate that strategy for anybody who's starting out, which I started out doing, you have your regular insurance of a primary residence, but when you move out, you got to get a landlord policy to cover tenants.
Yep.
So when I moved out of my first place, I just like rented it out. I didn't get anything. Now I found out later and nothing happened, thankfully, but I didn't change my insurance to for a rental policy. So you just have to have the right insurance. So one is like a landlord policy that covers tenants. You got to make sure you have that. If you're doing short-term or mid-term rentals, you need a short-term rental slash commercial policy to cover that, which I've also made that mistake too. And luckily, again, I haven't paid for these mistakes, but I've made them where you just have a regular landlord, oh, I'm going to Airbnb my house. Well, okay, you're uninsured. You know, you just got to get the right insurance. And then for any short-term and mid-term rental investors, I would also say that air cover and other sort of landlord coverage things that are offered by booking sites and booking platforms, those are not insurance. Now, I've heard that Verbo has an actual insurance product, and I haven't looked into it, but insurance is a special thing. They have fiduciary duties, they're regulated by law, they have a whole regulatory scheme where, like, if they screw you, you can get like a $50 million punitive damages verdict, like in the movie The Rainmaker, if anybody's seen that. So insurance companies have a special duty to cover you and pay for your defense and all of that stuff. And if you're relying on just like Airbnb saying, yo, I got you, that's not the same as an insurance policy. So, you know, even in, I do a lot of Airbnbs and I've been active in that. And, you know, I recommend a short term slash commercial policy and not relying on like just booking.com or Airbnb just saying, yo, we'll help you out if something happens, you know?
Yeah, so definitely, cover your assets. That's for sure. So let's move on to the next question. Is an LLC enough to protect me? And if not, what else can I do?
Okay. And also I just want to add one thing to
Sure.
the insurance thing is the umbrella insurance policy is something that you can personally get.
Okay.
And what that does, and this depends on your net worth, is if something happens in excess of what your property insurance policy will cover, then you can that then your personal umbrella can kick in to cover you for much more. So typically $1 million is the most that you'll get out of actual property or commercial insurance, unless you get a big commercial policy, which is a different thing. Typically 1 million. And then if you listen to some of these horror stories on Airbnb, 1 million sounds like a lot, but there was one where like a baby went and sat on a couch and it turned out that the previous people in there were using fentanyl and there was just enough like in the couch cushions to kill the baby. Now that, yeah, it's crazy, right? So, and that's not going to happen to most people, but like if it does, that is more than $1 million. That is worth much more than $1 million. You know, that kind of policy, if you're a high net worth person, you know, if you only own like one property, then okay. But if you're a high net worth person with a lot of stuff, you're going to want a personal umbrella for yourself in case something happens that's bigger than your insurance policy. Like, so I think I have a $2 million umbrella with $1 million regular insurance policy. And personal umbrellas are cheap. They're surprisingly not that expensive. So that's my addition is you want the property insurance and then you want to back yourself up personally with a personal umbrella policy. So there you go.
So the umbrella policy is like you're mentioning personal. It's for you, not for the corporation itself, basically, right? Is that
Right.
the
So
way it
in other
works?
words, if you get yes, if you get brought into it somehow, because that's the thing that you don't want. Like the whole point of a property in an LLC, let's say, is to limit everything to the LLC. So if the
Yeah.
worst thing happens, you lose the LLC and the property, but you don't lose your house, your primary residence and all your other retirement and all of that. So the umbrella would kick in, if and when you got brought into the any kind of lawsuit.
Okay. Yeah, that's very, very good to know. Thank you.
So, all right.
So, is an LLC enough to protect me? And just like you mentioned, a lot of real estate investors, the first thing they do is get an LLC, one, multiple. There's, different debates on that. So, question is an LLC enough to protect me? And if not, what else can I do?
So, On this one, I'm going to share my screen if you don't mind.
Absolutely, go right ahead.
So here's some cut and paste from this is something you will not see listening to the internet gurus of this stuff. These are cut and paste from actual legal briefs where the veil was pierced. We see right here implying the alter ego doctrine is the thing that they apply to pierce the veil. And you'll see this is kind of scary. In applying the alter ego doctrine, no particular findings are necessary, but the conditions vary according to the circumstances of each case. There's no litmus test. The essence is that justice be done. Liability is imposed to reach an equitable result. And in order to see justice is done, great liberality is encouraged. Like, that's scary.
Yes, it is.
You should, I mean, it is, right?
Absolutely, man.
And these are all case law, man. This is my buddy's case right here, a co-counsel of mine, published opinion. And so, right here, the alter ego doctrine prevents individuals or corporations from misusing the corporate laws by device of sham corporate entity for the purpose of committing fraud or other misdeeds. That sounds a little better because it's like I'm not committing misdeeds, but here's some of the factors. And again, there's a bunch of different ones. But basically, there must be a unity of interest and ownership between the corporation and its equitable owner, such that the separate personalities of the corporation and the shareholder do not in reality exist. And that's kind of the real point, is to be able to say, listen, this LLC and this guy are one and the same.
Mm-hmm.
They're not truly separate. Like, for example, if I'm a shareholder of Microsoft Corp, nobody's going to pierce the veil of Microsoft Corp to, on a judgment to me. Why? Clearly we're different. I have
Yeah.
nothing to do with it. I'm not an owner. Much different if I'm an owner and the president and everything else, and there's no one else, right? So that's the thing. So the key is to treat a thing as a separate thing. And this is so you don't, so the separate personalities of the shareholder and the corporation do exist. And second, there must be an inequitable result if the acts in question are treated as those of the corporation alone. Now, that's a little bit nebulous, and we'll discuss that. But that's really the two things. Now, here's how the court applies the factors, and this is where we get into preventative measures, is you look at the factors the court uses and says, if we find this, then we can pierce the veil, and then you don't do those. Okay, like court says, these are the bullet points of what we look for, and then you're like, okay, not doing that. So probably the number one thing is the commingling. The commingling of funds and assets is probably the biggest one. Identical ownership, which means that you and the LLC you're a substantial owner, like either majority or full owner of the LLC. Use of the same offices or employees, and this has to do with if you have a bunch of LLCs that are in the same location, or if your personal office and your LLC office address is in the same location and uses the same employees, then they're going to, be more likely to find that the two things are identical. And then use of one as a shell or conduit for the other's affairs. So like if you funnel your personal money, through the LLC or something like that, then they're gonna try to get you. And this is straight out of the practice guide for enforcing judgments. So this is straight out of an appellate opinion for when they actually found someone liable in this way. And it was commingling of funds, failure to segregate funds, unauthorized diversion of corporate funds or assets to other than corporate uses, treatment of an individual by an individual, the assets of the corporation as his own, disregard of legal formalities, and failure to maintain arm's length relationships. So you can't ever pay your personal bills out of your LLC. Just don't. So the answer to the question, because you asked the question, is an LLC enough to protect you, which I kind of digress from. The answer is maybe. If you do it right, then it might be, and hopefully it should be. And again, anything can happen in a court of law, and often does. But the answer is The answer is it could be if it's done right, then technically it should. It's very easy to screw up, though. If you're a real estate investor and you have a bunch of LLCs, it's very easy to screw this up. Don't divert corporate assets, don't commingle, do not pay your personal bills ever out of your LLCs. And if you're going to pay yourself, have a consistent payment and have like a written contract. So written contracts are important for arm's length.
So like a consistent distribution to yourself, and then you can do whatever you have to do with that, right?
Yeah, and you'll have like an operating agreement. I mean, essentially, and I kind of get into that down here in preventative measures, which we're jumping ahead, but rule of thumb, treat all your entities as if someone else owns them.
Got
The
it. Yeah,
lowest bar, like your brother owns it, but the highest bar is someone you don't know and who doesn't really like you owns it.
that's a good one.
So you're not going to just take money from it. There's hell to pay, right?
Yeah.
So
So this is good, man. This is good. So first off, have Richard on your side, not on the other side of the table. That's one thing I learned. Two, like if somebody in the case like this, I mean, does an umbrella policy come into play in any way? Is it beneficial? Like, let's say somebody did screw up, did one of these things, and they pierce the corporate veil. I mean, does the umbrella policy help out at this point?
it definitely should, but again, the devil's in the details. So it is an alter ego claim something that would be covered under an umbrella policy? That
Mm,
would depend upon your particular policy and the wording
provider.
of it.
No.
And I would think yes, because an alter ego is basically saying this guy and this company are the same thing. So if a policy covers the company and the guy behind the company is the same thing as the company, I would assume that it would cover. But again, the devil's in the details.
Got it. So now, obviously, we're here to share information with our listeners, and then to also provide them some guidance. And this is some awesome information. So, with that said, with what you just mentioned, let's say somebody does make some of these mistakes, right? I mean, like you said, it's very common. I do hear a lot talking to other investors and people that have entities. They tend to make these mistakes unintentionally. If somebody did that, is there a way to get that corrected? Is there a way to what do they do? I mean, is it done? They just have to be careful, or what do they do at this point? If somebody did commingle accidentally without having the right education, what can somebody do? What would you advise them?
Well, that's interesting. That is a really good question. And when I was writing up my presentation, I was trying to come up with an answer for that. And the answer is you got to stop doing it. So time frame does matter. So the best thing to do is stop doing it now from here on out. And look, remember, there's nothing going on, presumably, hopefully, if you're listening to this, there's nothing bad happening yet. So that right now, what you do matters less than what you do during like more relevant time. So what I would say is, yes, what's done is done, but you can stop what you're doing now, do it right going forward. And then if something comes down like 4 years down the line, nobody's going to look back to what happened 4 years ago. And if they do, and you're like, well, I've been doing it, it's been done right for the 4 years. There's not a very good chance that a court is going to say, yeah, this guy's commingling. You got to have something during a relevant time frame of when something happened. But I agree that is a little scary. You're like, I've made all these mistakes. What do I do? Another thing that you could do if you're a little more paranoid, just shut down the bank accounts that were involved with that. Reopen new clean ones, perhaps at a different institution. Again, if you're paranoid, and then reopen everything at a different bank and have it be clean, and then that way the old accounts may not even ever come to light.
Okay.
So, but again, what's done is done and nothing ever disappears, as you
Well,
guys
yeah,
know.
no, this is good. I mean, those are two good tips. Because like I mentioned, some people make mistakes, and it's like, how do we recoup from that? So that's good. Thanks for sharing that, Richard. So, what are the factors in determining piercing the veil, and how are they applied?
Yeah, and that, that's basically was showing here, and that is, and I'll just put it back there is the commingling of funds and
Okay.
failure to segregate funds as separate entities, treatment of individuals and assets, of the assets of the corporation as their own. And this is a case where the veil actually got pierced, and this is a scary one. Um, this is what we had for personal expenditures. Like this isn't really that much. These and the dollar numbers are not in there, but they're not really that big. I mean, you're talking about Marshalls and Ross Dress for Less and McDonald's, and this is over like a couple of years,
Okay.
right? And then you've got these wires to the person in these amounts. So there's a fair amount that was, but this is over a few years. This is over at least a couple of years. So this isn't drastic.
Hmm.
Um, and then this is where the entity paid the guy's personal mortgage. I think that's what probably killed him. Is getting the personal mortgage paid. But that one, this is all the commingling that it took in order to pop this one. And this is not, yeah, this isn't that much. So how is it applied? It's very tricky to say how it's applied, but one of the things they look for, if the person is actively avoiding, so if you have debts and you're actively avoiding and you don't, so this person did not have any money in their personal bank accounts. They did not take distributions from their LLC. They just paid money out of it, but they did not take distributions. So if you were trying to do a garnishment of the distributions, that wouldn't work.
Yeah.
So these people like specifically kind of arrange things for the purpose of avoiding, and so that really, when you've got an arrangement that's clearly for avoidance, then the court is a little more liberal, and they're like, yeah, okay, you can show a little bit less on the way of commingling if you show that the whole arrangement is to defraud people. And then it was, the facts are egregious. Like they went out and destroyed some high end mansion in Beverly Hills with 30 calls to the cops, and they did $500,000 of damage to the place, just totally destroying it. Got a judgment against them, and at the same time they went and bought this fancy other house for themselves and put it in an LLC so these guys couldn't collect anything. So it was a story of a bad person, and
Yeah.
these veil piercing things. And that's the thing, these are stories of bad guys for the most part. And
Okay.
if you do things right and you're not a bad guy, you're a lot less likely to get hit with it. But this is all it took. On this case, here's another one, Blizzard Energy, which is an appellate opinion that came down not too long ago. Probably the most recent one in the alter ego cases. This guy, had salary that he was supposed to take. He never took it. He wrote some checks on the account to like attorneys for a different thing, so he paid his personal legal bills out of it. He paid 80,000 out of the account for a personal loan to a friend, and then when the friend paid the loan back, he never paid the LLC back. Um,
Wow.
and he lived rent free. And he lived rent free on the property owned by the LLC. So, that was enough to bust him. And, he didn't have the right things in the memo portion of his checks. Like he had like vague stuff. So, how do you avoid that? Well, first of all, if you live somewhere or you're leasing, if you have something that's owned by a company that's your company and you're going to live there or use it, you need to have a written lease with the company or pay rent,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Again, the company is owned by someone who doesn't like you. How are you going to conduct your affairs? You're going to have a lease. You're going to pay that goddamn rent on the goddamn first, because that guy is going to be on you, right? And that's kind of the easiest way I can describe it is just pretend there's a guy who doesn't like you, owns the company, going to be on you to do everything by the book.
That's really the best way to look at it. Well said. Is like, treat the LLC like it's owned by somebody that doesn't like you. And that guy that paid his mortgage with the company's money, he even paid it late. It looks like,
Oh, yeah, I didn't notice that.
yeah, right there.
Oh
Look at that.
yeah, always late, right? Typical, typical.
So it's not about the amount that you're commingling. It's just about the consistent behavior and the consistent, commingling of the
I
funds
mean,
and so forth.
there's no rule. That's the problem with this is I can't, there's no rule.
Yeah,
There's times where you get hit with alter ego and there's no commingling at all. Now, I'm not even going into that stuff because the alter ego doctrine is a very wide thing that's designed to deal with all sorts of corporate fraud and shenanigans, but our just real estate investors are dealing with owning property and having liability on property. So
yeah,
but yes, there's no rule though for how much you have to do it or not do it. You just have to do it as little as possible. The other thing these guys did, they made cash withdrawals. They didn't maintain documentation for distribution of funds. So they were pretty bad. On this one, I don't have the case briefs because it's just an appeals opinion. So I don't actually, on this one, I do have the case briefs because that was a case that, I know. But this one is just an appeals opinion. So I don't know the extent of everything that these guys did in the Blizzard Energy case.
yeah.
But clearly they did a lot of the stuff that you're not supposed to do. I don't know to what extent or how consistent, but
Yeah. This is some good stuff, man. Good stuff. How about we talk about reverse piercing? What is reverse piercing and how does somebody avoid that?
so there's two kinds of veil piercing. The typical one, and really that's not so much of a separate topic. But reverse piercing is a little bit of a different flavor. There's so many different methods of alter ego. The regular veil pierce is where the LLC incurs a debt and I'm piercing down to the person to pay the debt on behalf of the LLC or the corporation. A reverse pierce is the person themselves individually owes the debt, and then I am piercing up going to the LLC.
Got it.
So it's just a different direction. Now that's very relevant to it's not super relevant to a lot of real estate investors who don't have a lot of opportunities to incur big personal liabilities. But if you're in a high liability field, like, mine is, or even, Alex, you do house flipping and real estate stuff that's kind of not the conventional stuff. You might fall under that with construction and all of that. Then reverse piercing is something to look at, which is if I get something going on with me, can they get to my LLCs? The answer to that, probably everything is very similar to regular piercing, except there's this one case called Kersey v. Baldwin. This is where James Baldwin had a judgment against his family LLC. And one of the reasons they pierced it was because that LLC just stopped making distributions, stopped making any regular payments like they were, and just stopped doing anything that would allow creditors to take the money, that was coming to him from the LLC. And so the creditors were like, well, we have no choice. If you don't pierce this LLC, we're never going to get paid. And it's James Baldwin. There was $170 million or something in there. So, on the reverse pierce, one of the things that you can do to prevent if something's going on with you to pierce up to your LLC is to take regular distributions pursuant to a written contract, and to take wages, for example, like a wage garnishment, like actually taking payroll for
Yeah.
management. That's actually not a bad idea because that is someone can do like a garnishment on it and they can only get 25%, and then the rest of it goes to you. And then you can say, well, listen, I'm doing it right and this LLC is paying me and that's the most that they can get. as
Yeah.
opposed to James Baldwin, who's like, I'm stopping all distributions. You're not getting anything. Boom. Like, you know.
Yeah, this is good. How does somebody maximize the possible? I know we touched on this a little bit, but let me know if there's anything else that you would want to talk about here. Is how does somebody maximize a possibility that their LLC or corporate structures will hold up in court, and how should someone conduct themselves and the business?
All right. Well, this gets into basically what I call here, I'll share the screen one more time, is preventative measures. And can you see that okay?
Yeah.
So this is where I get into treat all your entities as someone else owns them.
Hmm.
Brother or best friend is the absolute lowest bar, but highest bar and safest is someone who doesn't like you. And remember, and then remember that the goal is not to be perfect. The goal is to be good enough
Okay.
and to dissuade creditors to get a good settlement. There's no foolproof way to do this, but if you run it properly and are careful, then creditors are likely dissuaded. And that's kind of the point is you don't really want to deal with heavy duty types of alter ego litigation. You've lost already if you have to deal with that. The thing is, if you have certain factors that look pretty good, then it's likely that they're not even going to try to come after it because it costs
Okay.
money and they don't want to lose. They'd rather just settle, preferably with an insurance company. But if you're like just ripe for the picking, they're a lot more likely, right? So, probably the number one preventative measure, and everybody hates this, and I don't blame them, is don't self-manage.
Yeah.
So the problem is, and this doesn't even get to alter ego. Forget about all the commingling stuff that I said. If you self-manage, you personally self-manage your properties, someone falls down a loose stairway or something like that, it doesn't matter if you've done everything perfectly corporation wise and no commingling and you've done all this stuff and you're just perfect model citizen. They're just going to say, look, this guy managed it. He should have known, like he personally was the manager. So they're going to get you that way.
Yeah.
So that's a very easy way that they don't even have to do alter ego, right? They just say he's the manager. He should have known, and now you're in it. And then you got to be like, well, I didn't know, and I should have known. And you don't ever want to even get into that conversation of should I have known. Everybody self manages to start with, and that's okay. But property management companies right here in the typo here. Um, Property manager licensed PMs typically have a $5 million insurance policy. If you go with one of them, then you're covered not only by their insurance, but you're also covered by the fact that you are not the manager, and they can't just say, "Oh, Alex knew about everything that was going on at this house."
This kind of, ties with, how I hear about a lot of real estate investors or those that want to get into flipping or they want to buy property. They end up going getting their real estate license. And I tell them, why are you doing that? I mean, if you're going to get your real estate license to transact, that's great. You want to sell and help people buy and so forth. But if you're going to get your real estate license to become an investor, just like you mentioned, you're held to a higher standard. So if you make a mistake, you should have known better, right?
Right.
So that really ties into that. So a couple lessons we're hearing here and we're learning is that one, get the proper insurance. Two, don't rely on the insurance of the third party companies like Airbnb and VRBO and so forth. Get an umbrella policy and get a property manager to manage your property.
Which is all ridiculous expense, just more and
Yeah.
more expenses. Like, and honestly, so the property manager, look, I self manage, okay, so that should tell you something. It's not all, not in all cases, but yeah, I still do.
Yeah.
So, but this is ideal. I'm giving you the kind of like ideal scheme, right?
Yeah.
The necessary insurances. So don't self manage. Have the right insurance, and that's short term, midterm, long term. Just make sure you got the right
Specific.
thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then don't forget the personal umbrella. And honestly, if you've got these two things, if you've got these two things, then probably you're going to be okay. Even if you're doing alter ego violations and all this other kind of stuff, here's the thing about alter egos. If you have an accident on the property, this is what you got to always remember. This is kind of in our normal real estate investment situation, which is accident on the property. There's different flavors of stuff that can happen, and then you deal with different sorts of lawsuits. But the typical injury, catastrophic whatever that happens, you're going to get attorneys that are specializing in that. They
Right.
are not business litigators. Alter ego is a business litigation tool.
Okay.
So if you're dealing with an accident type of lawyer, even a very good one, there's ambulance chasers who are totally crap, and then there's high end ones, but even the high end ones, they don't like going into alter ego. They would prefer not to. They would prefer to settle it with insurance. So if you've
Insurance.
got the insurance, you've got the property management, most likely you will end up settling your case, and it will, going through all your bank statements and digging through your corporate minutes. That will likely never even happen. And even if it does, they will still prefer to take a settlement from insurance rather than roll the dice on an alter ego, because that alter ego stuff, it's a pain, and these types of lawyers don't like to do it. If you're a different type of person and you're involved in a nasty business dispute, it's a little more likely that they're going to go there. But
Got it.
but for your average investor, if you just have these two things, that is a pretty good start. So then the next thing is, and this stuff is a pain, but it's not as much of a pain as you think. You just have to be like, I'm going to accept this and I'm going to dedicate some time to it and take a deep breath and be like, I'm going to spend today doing this shit that I don't like to do, and it's going to be fine. And once you can do that, then you can do stuff like this, which is pay yourself a fair compensation according to some sort of system, have it be in a written agreement, in like an operating agreement, and comply with it. Again, it's an entity that's owned by a person who doesn't like you. So you want the written compensation agreement. The guy that doesn't like you knows you don't like him either. So he's going to pay you every month because he's your
True.
boss, right?
Yeah.
Periodic basis pursuant to written agreement. If you need more 1 month, too bad. The guy that doesn't like you's not going to give it to you,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Um, Wages are good because most of them are exempt, but either way, periodic distributions according to some system and some written agreement. Yeah, like any business, owners and employees should be paid periodic basis and under agreements. So that will help you getting those written agreements and then complying with them. Again, we just want to make sure to increase the likelihood the most that the business is going to be viewed as not me, right? So if I'm dealing with not me, I have contracts and agreements.
Yeah.
Commingling, we already touched on that. Don't pay personal expenses. Um, don't take money from your corporation into your personal account, even except under written agreement. And this is different. Don't pay personal expenses. Don't ever do that. Like if you want personal money out of your business, then you take it into your personal account and then you pay your
Pay
personal
from there.
expenses. You do not funnel your personal through your business. And also here's another important one. Don't pay bills of other entities using funds from other entities. So commingling is not just my entities paying my bills, it's my entities paying my other entities' bills, because sometimes this one will have money and this one won't.
Yeah.
So it's going to be tempting to just be like, I don't want to give my personal money to this. I'm just going to shuffle it over here. Don't don't do that. If an entity needs money, you do not rob Peter to pay Paul, and Peter and Paul are entities. If an entity needs money, you should loan it money personally with a payback schedule and stick to that with like a written thing. And or you can loan it money from another entity which doesn't have property or assets, whose sole purpose is management or short-term loans, and that's getting kind of out there. But again, don't take money from other entities to put in entities. If you're going to give money to an entity because it's broke and it needs to make its monthly payments, it's not generating cash flow, which by the way happens to us as real estate investors, newsflash. Um, you make a personal loan to the entity, and doing that is not necessarily commingling. Like you should try to minimize that. But typically the commingling that the courts hate to see is when you funnel money out of the entity to yourself or pay your personal expenses from the entity, if you're giving or loaning money to a business because it can't meet its bills, that is technically commingling, but it doesn't really meet the narrative of a guy who's doing a bad thing.
Okay.
And I've been involved in cases where there's been tons of commingling, and the court has said, yeah, but all of this commingling was them putting money into this thing to kind of try to save it. They didn't really benefit from it, and so the court's like, yeah, it's commingling and there's a lot of it, but it's really not exactly what we're looking for because it's not. And that's why it's hard to state a rule, because you can have a lot of it and it's just not the same. If you have to loan money, if your entity needs money, you can loan it money personally. It's not great, but you can do it. If you must take money out, you do a written loan agreement and keep records of it. So if you absolutely have to take money out that's not on the schedule, right, or compensation schedule, you do a written loan agreement. Again, it's a guy that doesn't like you. Involving others is a strong way to prevent a reverse pierce. So in the Blizzard Energy case, so if you don't have a single member entity, it's a lot harder to do. It's harder to pierce it because there's usually an innocent person involved and they have rights. So in the Blizzard Energy case, they actually, because the guy's ex-wife had 50% of the entity, they remanded it, which means they gave it back to the trial court and said, you guys need to run a different evaluation on whether we're going to let you do a pierce because there was an innocent person in in the entity who was not the person that got involved in the fraud and owed all the money. So one good way to, keep entities sort of safe from, a reverse pierce anyway, is to have more people in there, like multiple partners or at least one partner. And then that person's rights will, if someone's coming after that entity for something you did, they're going to say, yeah, but the partner's got rights. You can't just, blow it up, right? So having a partner helps involving other people.
So single member LLC, has more, it's more at risk to do
Oh,
this.
much more at risk. Yeah, on a regular Pierce, it's kind of similar because they're going to look for if one of the partners is acting a fool with the corporation, they could pierce the corporation for that one who's paying all his bills and all this stuff and not the innocent one. So on a regular pierce, kind of similar, but on a reverse where you get something against me and you're coming after my LLC that's owned with me and Alex had no idea that I was in trouble over here, that then the rights of Alex are going to kick in.
Got it.
So yeah, if you're a single member and also like some other people should own offices because again, even if it's kind of BS and it's really just you, if you have other people listed on there, that's a dissuasion because people will be like, "Oh, there's other people involved." Because again, it's all about, do I want to get involved in this? Do I want to take a shot at this guy? Is what it is.
Yeah.
So there's a lot, what you do underneath in your bank statements and all that stuff, you do want to do that right. But on the outside, you want to at least have an appearance that things are going to be inconvenient for some sort of creditor, and that will just on the outside make them want to take a settlement instead of jump and get really heavily involved in it. So, you can have someone else be the secretary or someone else be an officer, and then they'll see multiple people, right? And then you won't necessarily look like a single member.
Got it. Want to jump into the last question I have for you is something that comes up quite a bit, in real estate investing, and I want your perspective. I know I hear different point of views about this. Is LLCs, when you have a fix and flip or you buy a rental property and you get an LLC, you put it in it specifically for a fix and flip. Do you recommend using the LLC multiple times, or do you recommend closing the LLC once the property is completed and sold?
I don't know. I'm not familiar with like the fix and flip type of, I guess, litigation. I would say that just as a general rule, by the same token that we want to separate everything as much as possible, I would probably open up a new one every time. And, honestly, I mean, if you can't afford to do that, then you're not fixing and flipping right, right? I mean, it costs you $800. So I would say I wouldn't recommend using the same one over and over again. I'll put it like that. If you use the same one over and over again, then someone could probably say that this person has like runs this consistent business over many years on this thing, and that would be a little bit more of a better argument to say that this person and the business are somehow more identical to each other than if it was like a one-off where it was like one project. So I don't know. I would probably err in favor of not using the same one.
Yeah. Okay, that's a good point. So, before we wrap it up here, Richard, can you tell our listeners what's the best way for them to reach you or to learn more about your services?
Yeah, so best way to reach me, my real estate page is at Big Town Real Estate on Instagram. My law firm is the Evans Collection Law Firm, and you can just look that up. It's evanscollectionlaw.com, and that's Evans with two N's. So it's EVANNS collectionlaw.com, and that's my, legal website. Those would be the two best ways to reach me. My law firm does not have an Instagram. It's hard enough for me to get on social media to do real estate. It was like pulling teeth and killing me. And the idea of my law firm having a social media page, I just can't do. I just can't do it.
It's a lot of work, man. Yeah.
So there's a couple other things I do want to mention though, and I know we got to wrap.
Sure,
Um,
go ahead.
corporate formalities, and these are really annoying, but they're also really easy. And honestly, when it comes to doing corporate minutes and resolutions and stuff like that, and quarterly meetings where I just sign off on minutes or have my secretary do it, I've spent more time sitting around thinking about how shitty that would be, hours thinking of how annoying that is, and it takes 10 minutes to actually do. So it's one of those things where it's in principle, you're just like, this is like the most annoying thing ever, but it really can make or break you. Like, so when you do things, you have member meetings or shareholder meetings and have meeting minutes that you just type up and sign off by a secretary. Try to do them quarterly, but whatever your operating agreement says, you should do. And that again makes it look like it's something that isn't just you. You've got actual corporate books, and believe it or not, that can make or break a case. Um, the other thing that I'll say is that anonymity is cool. Wyoming and Delaware LLCs are kind of a trend, but please understand that you should not ever trust anyone that is advertising to you that if your property is in one state, that you can have an out-of-state trust or LLC, and then somehow are going to now apply. Be very cautious of believing anybody who says that, because almost always, if you've got a property in one state and it's subject to the courts of that state is not gonna, and you come in there into Texas and say, hey, my Delaware laws should apply. The Texas judge is gonna say, son, I don't think so, son. I mean, so you will be subject to wherever your property is, even if people try to tell you that you can do out of state stuff. And again, that's probably, and just in my experience, with a grain of salt, maybe there's some big heavyweights that know some stuff that that I don't know. Anyway,
That's great.
that's
Yeah.
and then very last thing, multiple and chain LLCs. People do that where like the property is owned by LLC one, and then the member of that is not you, but it's LLC two that's the member of LLC one, and then you may be the member of LLC two. So you've got another, buffer. And then sometimes a third LLC is the member of the second one, and you're a member of the third one. And then sometimes it goes out to four. You can just build it out. But to do that, you can build it out as much as you want, but ultimately you will need to explain if the worst case scenario happens, and you should always think of how am I going to explain to a judge why I did this? And if you can explain, and I don't really know a good way, but if you can find a lawyer or somebody who can come up with a good story of why you built your LLCs out to four in terms of being members, then maybe you can try it. But probably the most I would do is say have one member LLC that's like quote unquote a management company who's the member of one of the LLCs, and that will give you like a buffer, and you'd have to maintain it separately and all that stuff. So that's going to create a whole other bank account, and it's a whole other thing that's just a pain. But again, it doesn't necessarily have to hold up in order to just be very much of a dissuasion, right? So if you see LLC chains as a collection attorney, even someone who's familiar with them, I'm just like, man, I don't want to deal with that. Who wants to deal with that? And
Yeah.
that's kind of the whole point of a lot of this is you make it look good enough that people are just like, I don't want to deal with that, because most of the time it won't like actually go to court.
Yeah.
It shouldn't. So
This is
that's
great, man. This is very, very good. Anything else you want to touch on?
yeah, no, I mean that's God. I think that's enough
That's
information for
good.
anybody to choke on, right?
That's
So no,
very
I
true.
think I think that's it. It's just if you do everything by the book, it's all this stuff is very scary, but if you have the good insurance and you do everything by the book in the right way, you will probably be fine, because the one thing we should always remember, and I have to remind myself of this, is corporations and LLCs were created for a reason. And it is for the purpose of business owners being able to go out there and open up businesses and not have to worry about losing their house
Yeah.
every time that they do. The protection is there. You just got to do the right thing. So to avoid sacrificing it.
For sure. So just want to let you all know that we're gonna leave information down below about Richard, ways to get a hold of him, a little bit about his bio as well. So check that out. We'll have it down there for you, Richard. Thank you so much for the abundance of information. This was great. Very, very educational. And those of you that are listening or watching this video, please make sure you watch it twice and three times, because the information provided here is very, very valuable. And it's not something that you're going to just see on any other channel. This is the raw version. This is exactly what you need to know. It's scary, but this is exactly what you need to know. So thanks again, Richard, for your time. Appreciate it, man.
Awesome, man. Have a good one, Alex. Always
For
great to
sure.
see you, buddy. All right.
Thank you all for joining us on the Burr Investor Podcast. If you found today's episode helpful, please hit like and subscribe to our channel for more real estate insights. We love hearing from you, so please leave your thoughts, questions, or topics you'd like us to cover in the comment section below. Be sure to check out our website, theburrinvestor.com, and follow us on social media at The Burr Investor. Keep learning and investing, and we'll see you in the next episode. I'm your host, Alex Nale. Stay invested.